Welcome to the Defense and Aerospace Report. I'm Vago Muradian here at the Naval War College in Newport, Rhode Island, where we have the honor of speaking to the president of the Naval War College, Rear Admiral Jeff Harley. Sir, thanks very much for taking time out of your schedule to meet with us.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
It was great. We saw you 2 years ago when we were here for the International Sea Power Symposium, almost 2 years ago. Your term has been extended. At the time, we talked about what you were trying to achieve here at the War College to reinvigorate the school, focus on the CNO's guidance for higher velocity learning, for driving for innovation, to prepare for great power competition and get that intellectual foundation working. You've had a couple of more to-do items because now there's an intellectually, educationally minded defense secretary that's joined an intellectually minded chief of naval operations in the form of Jim Mattis, who's also added to the charter and to the urgency. Talk to us what you've accomplished in the last 2 years. What do you want to accomplish in the next 2 years of your term here at this great institution?
So the War College team, our faculty and staff, have been very effective at ensuring the relevancy of the college for the future. And that was really the Chief of Naval Operations, John Richardson's guidance to me, was go to the War College, see what you see, work with the extraordinary team up there in Newport, Rhode Island, and find mechanisms by which you can ensure relevancy. So we further operationalized the college. We do so much more than the educational role, which is our #1 mission, educate and develop future leaders. But we have a number of missions on top of that that provides us as a global command, as a resource to our fleets, as a resource to our maritime leadership, as a resource to our Congress and our national leadership as well. So it's an extraordinary team that is making efforts in terms of operationalizing the college, enhancing our wargaming. We are navalizing our college, providing greater focus on maritime art within joint maritime operations. We're futurizing our college, teaching domains that have never been taught here before, greatly expanding the lethality, the warfighting component of the college. We've added an additional 3 weeks worth of warfighting into the curriculum. Our final exams focus on the great power competition, so it's pretty extraordinary the range and focus of the types of things that are now being taught at the Naval War College under this great team of faculty and leadership. We've internationalized the college a bit more, offering more opportunities to our international students, and we're continuing to normalize the college to deal with the competition that exists among the Ivy League schools for the best professors in the world, and we're winning that competition.
What are some of the new coursework that you've introduced, given the challenges that have to be addressed for the future, right? I mean, when last we spoke, the importance was the relevancy for the challenges that we're facing. That's what framed the college when it was founded in 1883. What are some of the things that you're looking at? What are the new curriculums, the new lines of study that you think are integrally and critically important?
So we are making some changes within the focus of our curriculum. I've talked about the addition of additional warfighting, lethality into the curriculum. Of course, we study the other constructs of peace as well, and that's critical to our original mission from 1884 when Admiral Luce was here to establish the college. One other significant change is we've made leadership and ethics a continuous thread throughout the school year. In fact, the Chief of Naval Operations just a month ago announced the stand-up of a college of leadership and ethics here, and so that modifies the focus that we place. Of course, our #1 focus, of course, is warfighting. We also study the constructs of peace. We study a thread of history across the college, a relationship between the other elements of national power, the relationship between strategy and policy, so much more, but now including leadership and ethics on a more continuous basis.
How do you respond to those who say that if you didn't come with that leadership or at least the ethical foundation, isn't it too late to be teaching it by the time you get to this point in somebody's career, that your parents should have instilled some of that in you? Whether you're at the Academy or ROTC, you should have had the role models to make sure that they're reinforcing good behavior, and that by the time you get to this point, you may have already learned some bad behavior, and how do you unlearn it at this point?
Well, I think we should recognize that leadership and ethics is constantly evolving, and as we continue to progress throughout our careers, the challenges of leadership and the ethical challenges and the types of ethical issues that we face are very different at each step of the journey along the way. So it's important to teach leadership and ethics continually. CNO's Leader Development Framework talks about technical competency, and we're very good at being warfighters, but there's also an element of character competency and ensuring that we have the character to maintain the trust that we've earned at heavy price from the American public. So we work hard to ensure that we teach leadership and ethics as part of a continuum that should be and always will be a lifelong learning process.
What are some extra requirements that have come your way since Secretary Mattis took office? There have been a whole series of schools. The Eisenhower School, there's pressure to reinvigorate, return that to its industrial-based mobilization roots of the school. At each one of the colleges, there's this focus on warfighting and addressing and facing some of those challenges. How has your guidance changed as part of the entire education enterprise of DoD based on some of the guidance that's going to him and then going from him to the CNO and then from the CNO to you?
So the Secretary has said that professional military education has become stagnant. We have looked as part of our efforts to ensure relevancy of the college and, of course, making a great institution even greater at how we do increase the lethality and the war fighting here within the college. And we have achieved that end. We've added the war fighting. We've focused on the great power competition. We have reorganized through things like a Russia Maritime Studies Institute to ensure that we reflect the geostrategic environment in which we fight. We now do a future warfighting symposium that addresses the technologies that are already here or on the cusp of affecting our environment, and we've built that into the curriculum. So we are working hard on the front of lethality to get after the challenges that Secretary Mattis has identified. He's also identified a need for greater innovation. And we're doing that as well through a number of our advanced research programs. Our Gravely group specifically looks at innovation and technology and how this enables the fighting force and the other elements of national power. So it's one great team here with 7 different missions that are achieving those ends. We are not stagnant. We are moving into the future rather rapidly to achieve the vision that the Secretary has, that he has relayed through the Secretary of the Navy, through the Undersecretary of the Navy, and through the Chief of Naval Operations.
Let me ask you a slight admin question before we continue the conversation on sort of more strategic topics. One of the challenges that you hear when you, when Secretary Mattis talked about stagnation, and I talked to friends across the military education enterprise, and a challenge came up with folks who have tenure who may be looking at it through the cold reality of today maybe should not have that tenure. Do you have that higher fire, for lack of a better word, authority and autonomy to be able to make changes to the staff to make sure that you have the talent where you need the talent for the challenges that you're facing today, not necessarily the challenges you may have been facing a decade ago?
So Title 10 of U.S. law gives us a great range of authorities for hiring the people that we need to be a part of a competitive process that attracts and retains the very best professors in the world. Part of that process is a granting of tenure to the select professors who meet the requirements. Tenure doesn't mean that you can't, for disciplinary reasons, lose your position within a college system. It gives you a greater opportunity for the intellectual freedom and the contributions you can make because you might be tenured. And we treasure those as an Ivy League equivalent school. But if there are disciplinary issues, we of course retain the authority to replace the professors, and they're all aware of the elements of what tenure really means. But it is a significant step forward in granting tenure, and this is the first year in which we're going to do that with the blessing of the Secretary of the Navy and the Chief of Naval Operations, because it makes us even more competitive in this highly dynamic and challenging environment to attract the very best talent that we can.
Let me take you to the issue of the environment we find ourselves in. So you're all of these pipelines of rich intellectual work. Sort of you're in touch and you have your fingers on it, both professionally but intellectually. You're interested in these areas, and I want to get to that in a minute. As you feast on the work that's coming out of everybody here, what is the environment that we're going into? You know, from the standpoint of, as you're looking out, say, 10 years from now, or even 20 years, what are some of the most interesting factors from your standpoint that is shaping that environment that the United States and its allies, and particularly the U.S. Navy, is going into?
I think there's a couple elements. One is this return to global competition. And as you see in the new National Defense Strategy, a greater focus on China and Russia as a function of this return to global competition. And our organizations, our education institutions, need to adjust to best enable our force to compete in that global competition. And we do provide, as part of our mission, direct support to the fleet. So we have adjusted accordingly to be able to do just that. We have a world-class China Maritime Studies Institute. We have a relatively new but already thriving Russia Maritime Studies Institute that are dealing with some of the more broader issues that we're facing today. We're looking at the new technologies and the exponential rate of technology that exists that is having the potential to change the battlefield and the way that we fight. So we are making compensation, and we're modifying our curriculum to keep in line with those changes and making a great institution even greater.
Do you, as you look at your lines of study, friends of mine that I'm here for a surface warfare officer school event, and one of the things we're talking about is the future of surface warfare. And one of the questions is how it will be very different than folks think. You know, instead of the sort of Mahanian battle of consequence, we may be in sort of phase 2 now, and that the adversaries want to gain without ever getting to phase 3. Well, I'm sorry, that's old term, right? That's no longer that according to the joint publications. But do you think that the complexity of the situations that potential adversaries are going to face are going to present commanding officers with unique challenges that are more communications problems perhaps than military problems? That, for example, the Chinese may want to swarm somebody with fishing trawlers or confront them with fisheries vessels that may be very, very belligerent, but the message they want to get out of this is bristling American battleship sinks, you know, humble fishing trawler. To what extent is the thinking and the shaping of the curriculum to get folks to think critically about problems that as naval officers they might not have been thinking for many decades, in terms of the complexity of the challenge that adversaries are trying to present to advance their interests short of a shooting war in which they will lose against the United States?
So what the college delivers, among an extraordinary education, a master's degree in the issues of national security, is we deliver a joint professional military education that directly enables their training and education and skill sets to fight in the joint environment, which is how we fight. But more importantly, what our one-year curriculum delivers, and it's a 2-year master's degree in 10 months, rigorous and challenging, about 900 pages of reading per week, very comprehensive, detailed, and difficult exams, group projects, wargaming, all of these that make up the student experience here across a year. But at the end of that year, what the students tell you they take away is a different toolkit, the ability to think more critically. And this is critical in the providing the best military advice to our civilian leadership. But they walk away as a result of having this extraordinary curriculum and the time to reflect, the ability to achieve new levels of thinking that can apply in the remainder of their years in military service. So it is an extraordinary task that's delivered in a short period of time here at your US Naval War College.
I like the plug, and if I could take 10 months and join you here, I would be one of the biggest honors of my life. let's talk a little bit about wargaming. It's often said that World War II really, at least World War II at sea against Japan in particular, was won here at the War College, that almost everything an adversary could do, with the exception of the kamikaze, was wargamed out here, so that there was a knowledge, understanding. The War College was shaping the fleet battle force problems, which Admiral Swift has been bringing back, working with you and your team to do that. Talk to us a little bit about how you've been working to get even stronger at the wargaming function, and in your estimation, have you gotten good enough to wargame out all of the potential things that our adversaries may want to do to us? Do you think that as good as the War College was, I have to add, night fighting was something that did catch us by surprise as well in World War II, right? That the Japanese were very good at night fighting. Talk to us on both ends of that.
Sure.
What are you doing to get stronger on that? And do you feel you're strong enough to wargame out all of the different things that these very creative, technologically adept adversaries want to do to us?
So there's been a renaissance in wargaming these last several years, to be honest, and it is everything from the level of gaming that we're playing at, the classification level. It's the infusion of new technologies and domains like cyber and space, and being able to play those as part of the games. It's the ability to provide more in-depth analysis after a game. It's the integration with the remainder of the operations analysis community, like the people who do experimentation, like the people who do modeling and simulation. And those things are creating this renaissance, this significant move forward in wargaming that we're experiencing now. The analysis is fed to all of the military leadership, the naval maritime leadership, so that they can extract the illumination that comes out of it to include it in the operations analysis community to make broader decisions that they would be required to make. So do I think the wargaming is providing extraordinary illumination? Yes, it is. It's providing the illumination and the analysis that our senior leaders need to have as we move forward. And of course, we do a lot of day-to-day iterative gaming against our global competitors. So yes, I do believe that we live in an uncertain world, so there will always be some element that perhaps we don't see, but we work very hard to ensure that the gaming results that we provide are appropriately red teamed, are appropriately played to the highest level using the existing technologies. We play a range of games in that process, and more importantly, we've introduced gaming back into the curriculum here for the students. So not only do we inculcate the understanding of what wargaming can deliver, but we give every student an opportunity to see the value in this as we infuse greater lethality and warfighting into our curriculum.
I want to ask you about the Breaking the Mold series. That's an idea that Harlan Ullman, a retired Navy captain, PhD naval strategist and thinker, suggested to Tom Modly, the Undersecretary of the Navy, and the Undersecretary has taken that challenge up in terms of an initiative to drive creative thinking, potentially heretical thinking, which I think is one of the elements of that. Talk to us about that initiative from a War College standpoint, why it's important. I've spoken to Sam Tangretti, one of the big thinkers you have here, who's also engaged in that process, and the VCNO. Admiral Bill Moran was also up here during that conference, and now the report is being prepared. Talk to us how important that is, but efforts like that also to take the entire leadership out of potentially very some comfort zones they may have, whether about systems, to sort of break that mold, to get people to think fundamentally differently about challenges.
Well, there's, of course, the famous quotation attributed to different people, but we've run out of money, now we have to think. And of course, our great Navy has been thinking for a long time about the significant challenges of the day in a time period with potentially decreasing resources. So having a conference like this that looks outside the box, that addresses the major competition elements in the world, to try to find unique solutions and ideas, and to build it into a continuum of potential action items for the future. So we've done the first one a month or so ago. The report's just coming out. It's providing new insights to our naval leadership. We're going to follow up with another Breaking the Mold conference in October, and then another one in the spring as we continue to expand the aperture to an even more diverse group of people who are providing these unusual and breaking ideas on how that we can transform everything from the national security paradigm down to specific tactics and operational procedures that we can be using in the field. So it is a unique opportunity to get the greatest minds in the world together and to think in new ways as if we were unhindered by the normal bureaucratic processes that might slow us down. So it is extraordinary in its scope and its breadth. It's amazing to have the leadership of the Secretary of the Navy, the Undersecretary of the Navy, who was the specific sponsor for this particular event, the Chief of Naval Operations and the Vice Chief of Naval Operations who attended the conference, and then the outputs are providing direct support to the fleet that'll make our great Navy and our great nation even better.
The Naval War College in the interwar period was heretical in embracing the aircraft carrier, for example. And then you could argue the battleship admirals took that and said, oh yeah, that's interesting, but there's still scouting elements of the force. How much heretical thinking is possible, do you think, in the Navy today when you have very large, very cherished programs, not to pick any particular system, but some of these decisions are systems-based decisions that we stay with for very long periods of time, even if potentially there are threats to them. So in a sort of a general sense, do you feel like there's this space for heretical thinking and to get those messages up if those are the right ideas for the future, irrespective of what it may mean for a particular system?
I absolutely believe there's room for thinking and heretical thinking and influencing strategic thought. And we pride ourselves on being the home of strategic thought and contributing in so many different domains, whether it's congressional testimony or providing gaming analysis and ops analysis support to our fleets and to our maritime leadership, the Chief of Naval Operations and the Commandant of the Marine Corps. The idea behind a Breaking the Mold conference to provide a voice behind that kind of thinking, and then of course the academic freedom provided to our extraordinary and gifted professors as they voice the issues that they see, that contribute to a national and maritime dialogue that make us better in the end. So absolutely room for it. In fact, it's a requirement. There's a book by a Professor Tom Nichols called The Death of Expertise, and it's one of the factors that's changing the strategic dialogue that's going on around us, that in the face of truth and facts, social media drives people to hold on to a position that just cannot be factual, that is not supported. And in this world, influenced by those kind of issues, the role of the professors here is more important than ever before in contributing to this dialogue to make a difference in this time where the capabilities between the great power competitors seem to be closing, and to take back the advantage and keep it. That's our new charge, and that's exactly what we're working on here at the college.
One of the challenges by the Chief of Naval Operations, there once was a time when everybody in the professional officer class was schooled here at the Naval War College. And then came a time when the Navy looked at that as kind of a waste of time. Seed time and operational assignments were more important. And now the CNO is saying, I want all of my commanders to be graduates of the Naval War College. The Air Force, there's nobody in the Air Force that didn't graduate Squadron Officer School, and the Army always makes time for folks to go to the war colleges. Talk to us a little bit about how that's reflected in the Navy's overall approach. It's one thing for the CNO to say, hey, I want to have this, but then there are detailers and a whole bunch of other people in the system who are saying, hey, you know what, Harley, you ought to be going and taking this assignment instead of you don't have time for that. How is the Navy changing to put the premium on that higher education as opposed to saying, I'd rather have you for 10 more months standing watch or having some other more operational assignment than something which is a very important educational assignment?
So I do think we're at this golden moment in time where we're receiving new focus from the Secretary of Defense. We've got a Secretary of the Navy and the Undersecretary of the Navy who have embarked on an education for sea power study. And we've got the Chief of Naval Operations who's making a very concerted effort to have our service value education more than it ever has in the past. And this is the broader issue to which you're speaking. And the CNO is doing just that. We've started a selection board process very similar to the other services. And if the CNO makes the decision to make this a requirement for different elements of command, then what we have is a refocusing, a revitalization of education like never before. This will truly change the culture of the United States Navy, set us on a great pathway forward. It's already an extraordinary institution with an extraordinary legacy that can only be made better by a great Navy that embraces the education and the education institutions that it has.
One of the things that's striking is the number of foreign Navy chiefs who've attended this institution. We were here for the International Sea Power Symposium. The sheer number of people who were posing next to, or when their picture was coming up on a screen, whether they were from Malaysia or any one of a number of other countries, was incredible. But yet, that also presents a challenge, and we talked about this a little bit. Talk to us about the internationalization of the curriculum and why that's so critically important. On the other hand, what are the potential challenges it poses? I don't want to single Turkey out, but that's a challenge. It's a close ally, but it has experienced changes that, depending on who you talk to, are not necessarily welcome. Talk to us a little bit about both the opportunity there, but also the potential challenges that poses as, an international institution where you are sharing some very sensitive and sophisticated intellectual thinking about our capabilities and the capabilities of our allies.
Sure. Well, we have an extraordinary international program, which you alluded to, and the number of graduates who go on to become their heads of Navy or heads of Coast Guard, and in some cases, they're heads of their nation for that matter. And it's a reflection of this institution's value. They send the very best people that they anticipate becoming their heads of their Navy because of the extraordinary opportunities that are here, because of the level of education, because of the camaraderie that exists, and the lifelong learning that goes with being a part of this institution. So our throughput each year is about 600 students, although we have a distance education that'll graduate another 1,000 students every year. But 1 out of every 6 students who graduate in residence is an international student. That's important for the college. The international students are in the classroom with the American students. They're providing a different perspective. And candidly, they stop us from thinking just like Americans. We are required to have an international perspective as a result. But the lifelong friendships that you make, the continuity of the alumni network, ensures that we strengthen our global maritime partnerships. And there's a number of anecdotal stories that, as a function of relationships that were made here at the US Naval War College, that conflicts have been avoided or that off-ramps have been provided, all because of the personal relationships that were developed right here. So there are great opportunities for doing just that, for strengthening our global maritime partnerships. There are challenges, given the dynamic global international politics that we must operate in. You gave one example, and it's unfortunate when a nation has to pull its students out. We do not have Russian students right now. We are represented by Taiwan as part of our One China policy. So I really think there's very few disadvantages or challenges, to be honest, with a program like ours. Nations compete to come here, and it gives us extraordinary opportunity within our curriculum. It makes our U.S. students better. It makes our institution better. But the advantages far outweigh any minor challenges that we would see along the way.
Do you think that there's room? I mean, I was talking to a friend of mine actually, and it's interesting you mentioned Russia and as well Taiwan, which has been a close U.S. ally for decades. But there are friends of mine who've said, it would be really good if you had the crack Russian student and Chinese students that were here also to build that dialogue so that a future Jeff Harley can pick up a phone and say, hey, look, what's going on here? From that standpoint, is there a way to do that in a way that doesn't compromise, it doesn't become an intelligence gathering thing any more than it already is? I mean, I can imagine a manifest series of challenges, but also can see a whole series of potential value to doing something like that.
There are trade-offs to these complex political issues that exist. And there is an argument that would say, you know, interacting with other challenging nations is important to help develop understanding. On the other hand, we are a warfighting institution, and it's probably not a good idea to teach our warfighting processes to global competitors. And so we choose not to. And this is a policy decision, not necessarily a military one, but it is an appropriate policy decision that aligns the nation that do get to attend this incredible institution.
My last question is, innovation now is driven by so many factors, and there are centers of innovation excellence. Folks have a tendency of looking at Silicon Valley. The Economist a couple of months ago did a great article about saying that actually that center of gravity may already have moved to China, and folks aren't paying as much attention as they should to that. How, as you said, an Ivy League level institution like yours, talk to us about the partnerships you've struck with educational institutions to make sure that you and your faculty in particular are on the razor's edge of learning in each of their disciplines, because learning is and research is so much more a collaborative process. It's always been a collaborative process, but even more so today in a digital age. Talk to us about how you're striking those kinds of partnerships to make sure that you've got a finger in a lot of these other pots that you have that span, that understanding, and can draw on talent to make sure that your students are getting the best education.
No, you ask a great question. We often treat innovation like it can only be technology, but there's also learning and teaching and thinking innovation as well. For as much focus as some people will place on technology, you can do other things in terms of doctrine and simply providing a new toolkit of critical thinking that enables our best military advice or changes on the battlefield. The thinking leader is the one that's going to carry the day. And I know Secretary Mattis would say the exact same thing. That said, we actually do both. So we do the technology component. We have groups of people focused on just that. We have electives focused on different technological elements. We have a Gravely group that specifically looks at technology and innovation and the fielding of those kind of technologies. And of course, we're world-renowned for the partnerships that we develop. So we work very closely with many other Ivy League schools as we work on different projects together, whether it's humanitarian assistance, which we do with Harvard, recently with Brown. Our Women's Peace and Security Conference this year is being held in concert with Brown. We work maritime history issues with Yale. We work closely with MIT and so many other schools here in the region and more. We have a close affiliation on the history front with King's College in London. We're partnered with the Japanese equivalent of our institution in doing warfare futures. We work closely with the United Kingdom. We work with many of the countries throughout the world to ensure that we're on that edge of technology and learning innovation and relevancy for the future.
You were commissioned in 1983, where the Soviet Union was a defined adversary whose strategy we knew. We knew how they were going to fight us in the event that something happened, whether from the nuclear side to the tactical side. Naval warfare was going to be on sea lines of communications, was going to be off the Kola Peninsula, and we knew that there were a lot of ships that were going to be lost, but we knew roughly how this game was going to be played. This is a very different game that both China and Russia are trying to prosecute at below a full-scale shooting war. Is it hard, do you think, for people to wrap their minds around the complexity of this challenge? Because all too often when you talk about what conflict would look like, for example, with China, people talk about large-scale missile exchanges and you know, how the South China Sea will be uninhabitable and they'll make it uninhabitable, so we have to make it uninhabitable. But they don't discuss as much a whole variety of other features to this potential conflict that will be exceptionally different from what we've seen ever in the past. Can you talk to us a little bit about that sort of mental adjustment and the education that perhaps national military leaders have to do in thinking about how these two adversaries are trying to use every advantage that stops short of that battle of consequence that folks have a tendency of thinking when they think about war, conflict, and even competition?
So I think the nature of conflict itself has certainly changed from when I first joined the Navy, and it's constantly evolving. The amount of technology, the exponential rate of technology, the inclusion of new domains, whether it's space or cyber. Admiral Stavridis, for example, says that it's no longer, air, sea, and land, that it's now unmanned systems, special operations forces, and cyber, that the domains are completely different. The number of threats is vastly, significantly more complex than what we had in 1983. The lethality of the weapon systems that we use and others use is also exponentially higher. It is a very different and complex environment, but today's sailors are just as capable of wrapping their mind around these complex challenges and dealing with these threats. And these are international threats, and we have an extraordinary maritime strategy that includes being forward deployed and using our partners and alliances to ensure that we have the capabilities that we need to win the fight, to carry the day as required. So it is much more challenging. It is much more demanding on our people today. But the Naval War College, of course, helps with providing that joint maritime operations focus, the joint professional military education that's needed, as well as a service, a maritime perspective that enables the success of our force. And we provide that direct support to the fleet, not only through our students, but through our training arm, our other education arms, and the courseworks that we provide directly on warfighting and in support to the fleet through our planners and our strategists and so many more. Absolutely.
And does the CNO's new guidance to create another department on ships for training and education, does that change your relationship? Do you have now another conduit that gets two ships from that different sort of non-traditional pipe?
So what I think we're going to see is that we're starting to recognize that education and training are lifelong events. Always have been, and we need to find those touch points along the way where we can infuse the right education, the relevant education for that particular moment in time. And that's what you see at the War College as well, is that there's a time and a place for attending the War College to get the level of technology and history and war fighting and leadership and ethics and so much more to become the very best officers and support staff that we can be to our fleets and our fleet commanders.
Rear Admiral Jeff Harley, President of the United States Naval War College. Sir, it's always an honor to be here. Thank you so much for your time, and already looking forward to the next conversation.
I look forward to it. God bless you. Thanks.